Hi, this is Donna DiClementi, your host for In It Together, a podcast about caregiving from Moffitt Cancer Center. I'm the manager of outpatient social work and really delighted to introduce this next episode to you. Our guest is Randy Isaacson. Randy is a patient family advisor and producer of this podcast, and he talks to us about his journey as a caregiver when his wife, Lynn, was diagnosed in 2019. And I want to tell our listeners that this episode is a bit longer than the other episodes we've had so far. And it's because Randy's advice and his journey is compelling. And I think that all listeners will certainly be captivated by the way that Randy tells the story and everything that he learned and he's sharing with us. So he takes us on this journey of an unexpected cancer diagnosis and how caregiving evolved over time in supporting his wife and navigating work and adult children and concrete issues like managing appointments and medications and hospitalizations. And then he really talks about what this impact had on him emotionally, spiritually, and how it's kind of driven the rest of his life. So I'm really glad that you're going to get to experience Randy Isaacson because it was a great episode. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to In It Together, a podcast about and for caregivers and the people they love. I'm Donna DiClementi, your host and manager of outpatient social work at Moffitt Cancer Center. In each episode, we'll dive deep with a wide range of caregivers to better understand the highs and lows of caring about someone with cancer. You'll meet the wives, husbands, partners, friends, children to hear what worked well and what didn't work well as they became a caregiver for their loved one with cancer. Our hope is that by listening to caregiver stories, you will learn valuable information, plus feel supported, encouraged, and renewed. After all, we are in it together. Thanks for joining us. I am happy to welcome Randy Isaacson to the podcast. I know that our listeners will find Randy's story and experience as a caregiver to his wife Lynn as moving and helpful as I did. Randy's wife, Lynn, died from cancer in 2019, and Randy and Lynn raised 2 children. Randy is now a grandfather. Randy owns a marketing business, and he spends time giving to Moffitt Cancer Center as a patient family advisor. It's important to recognize that Randy serves as a producer of this podcast and has been instrumental in getting In It Together off the ground. And he does a lot of other initiatives at Moffitt as well. And so I appreciate his willingness to share experiences of being a caregiver for his wife with all of us. And so thank you, Randy, today for joining me on In It Together.
Thanks for inviting me, Donna. It's a pleasure.
Randy, can you tell us about Lynn, your children, and how you became a caregiver for a loved one with cancer?
Sure. In 2019, we had a big trip planned, a big family trip planned at Yosemite National Park. And my daughter, and at that time, her boyfriend, and my son, and his girlfriend, and my wife and I, we were all getting together and going to go hiking at Yosemite. And that summer before, Lynn and I had done a lot of kind of working out to prepare for this. And we got to Yosemite and started a hike, and Lynn stopped. She just realized she couldn't go any further. And it was really odd, something we'd really been looking forward to, and she just wasn't feeling right. So the next day she stayed back at the Airbnb, and I hiked with the kids, and then we flew back to Wisconsin from there, where our cottage is. And Lynn said, "I'm not feeling right. Let's get back to Florida where our doctor is." And we got back down here as soon as we could. She visited her primary care doctor. Initially, they thought it was maybe a thyroid condition or perimenopausal condition, but then they did blood work and saw that her platelets were dangerously low and said, you need to get to the emergency room. So we went to the local emergency room, with everybody with coughs and broken bones and whatever else might show up in the emergency room. And they did blood work there also. And we were in one of those kind of cubicles at the emergency room, and a couple of doctors came in and said, we think you might have some form of leukemia. And she was admitted in the community hospital. And shortly after she was admitted, one of the doctors said, we need to get you to Moffitt. I think they saw a relatively healthy person, 55 years old, and this had come on very quickly. And we knew nothing about leukemia. She had acute myeloid leukemia, and it had progressed from a couple other acronyms that are used with different leukemias. And we got an appointment at Moffitt, and that was the beginnings of our first experience with any kind of significant health issue in our immediate family. So that's the background of kind of where I am right now.
What was that like in the beginning, those initial weeks, once you kind of got to Moffitt? What was that like for you and Lynn?
Well, I think our feeling was, because we had heard a little bit about Moffitt, great things, and our feeling was this is going to get handled. We're at a place that has worldwide expertise and resources, and we're pretty fortunate to be fairly close to this research facility, this hospital, and we only thought the positive. There really was no alternative than the positive, than a good outcome. We had no idea what it entailed. Pretty quickly we learned that she would be admitted into the hospital for a fairly long period. The first course of chemotherapy is intense, and so to reduce the risk, you're admitted. You're an inpatient, and for like 30 or 40 days. And we said, they said we'd get a call and show up at X day, and almost like checking into a hotel for a long stay, as strange as that sounds. And when we got up to the floor, and I think it was 4W, there was a nurse there, and she said, "Oh, you must be Lynn. Welcome. This is going to be your home for a while." And that felt good. It felt like the tone was great, the spirit was great, and so it took a little bit. We just did not even come close to thinking about a bad outcome in the very beginning. The one thing I want to point out is we took us a few days before we told our children. They were adults, they were working their jobs, and we didn't want to tell anybody until we knew what were we going to do. We didn't want to necessarily have something open-ended, so we wanted to wait till we knew what the plan was before we let them know.
How long did you wait?
It was about 3 or 4 days. Yeah, it was about 3 or 4 days, and it was, and we agreed on it. The two of us talked about it. I think we both felt that way. We didn't want to add. We knew it was going to add a lot of worry, and we knew, knowing what the next step might be, as we explained what the situation was, might give them a little bit of comfort. So,
I'm glad that you brought that up, because a lot of caregivers struggle with what to tell, who to tell, when to tell. And a lot of times the focus ends up being on minor children, but your children were adults. And once you told them, are you able to share whether they felt that they understood the delay, or were they a little annoyed?
They weren't annoyed. They understood. I think they may have thought, we have a very good relationship with both our kids, and I think they may have thought, kind of like, we trust you on this.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't a talk about, we didn't want to scare you, or we just wanted to have more information.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, I think that was a good thing.
Good.
There's a lot of change and information, and I think what you realize, and I've got a couple of friends, everybody has different health issues at one time or another, and I think when you are on the outside, sometimes you feel like, well, there's always an answer. Once you start getting diagnostic tests,
Mm-hmm.
and you start going, you have a particular condition, you think, oh, well, there's a way of treating it. And what you often, I think, run into is, there's a lot of unknowns still too, and everything doesn't seem to work just as we'd like it to work.
Sure.
And there are twists and turns and surprises, and that was our experience. And also, you got to kind of keep your balance when you have all these twists, turns, and ups and downs, and that's a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So, were you part of that first initial admission? Did you stay as well?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We came in together, and I spent, when she was an inpatient here, I would be here roughly from around 9 or 10 in the morning till 6 or 7 at night. And some of that was just, quietly sitting in her room with her, and some of it was talking, and a lot of it was walking too.
Mm-hmm.
There was a big emphasis because she was going to be an inpatient and in a bed for a good portion of time, and she was weak, and the medicines were, pretty powerful on
Sure.
her, but they really emphasized walking, so we'd walk loops in the wing.
Mm-hmm.
And we did a lot of that. I'd go down to the cafeteria, pick up some things. She liked the idea of ordering off the menu.
Uh-huh.
Was surprised that the food was pretty good. Was often a lot more than she cared to take in, especially because she was getting chemotherapy
Uh-huh.
and other things. And so we'd share meals.
Yeah.
And I never spent the night. And that was an option. I think her room had a little area, or they could bring a pull-out bed. But Lynn felt like, hey, you're going to be a lot more comfortable if you're at home.
Mm-hmm.
And she was admitted in October of 18. And so a good portion of October, November, December, she was in the hospital. It was wintertime, so it got dark fairly early.
Yeah.
So, and it got, it stayed dark in the morning. So we drive here often in the dark, and I drive home in the dark. And,
Mm-hmm. What did you do during that period to take care of yourself while you watched Lynn with this disease?
Yeah, there was, I've always been a big walker, and I found that walking was very helpful, and nature, being outdoors. Even when she was an inpatient here, I might say, I'm going to go for a walk out in the campus,
Mm-hmm.
the USF campus. And the walking really helped. I tried to continue to exercise. One of the big adjustments for me was the planning of meals. I hadn't really been the one to do that in our life. And we were together for 34 years. And there were certain meals that I would do, but for the most part, she was handling meal planning, And so that actually occupied my mind quite a bit, figuring out, because we had people visiting, wanting to see Lynn and our kids. And so there was a part of having things going on at home. Hey, people need to be fed, and you need to have the right groceries. And, figure a lot of times on my trip home from the hospital, it's like, I got to pick up some groceries. In fact, one time I brought up the idea that maybe they have a Publix pharmacy here. Maybe they need a Publix grocery store kind of on campus. Or nearby.
Yeah, definitely. How about, you kind of talked a lot about your physical health, which of course leads into mental health. Was there anything in addition to the walking and thinking about meal prep that you did to kind of take care of your mental health?
Yeah, on the mental health side, I think I would try to get my head around how to think about what was going on, and and how to describe it. I also did journaling, writing. It was a way of getting thoughts down, and I just let myself wander as I wrote. I'd write about times in our life together, specific memories. I'd write about perspectives I had on things, and I try to write 1,000 words. It was almost like if I was exercising for 30 minutes, except I put a number of words on it. And I always felt better when I was done. It was real helpful in terms of just kind of getting my head in a different space. So journaling was helpful for me.
Had you been journaling prior to Lynn's diagnosis? Is that a practice that you've had for a while?
My job was as a writer a good portion of my career, so I was very comfortable with writing. I hadn't been keeping a journal at the time, but at different times in my life I had.
Okay.
So it was something I was pretty comfortable with. And when I write, I just write from my own eyes. I definitely don't think about other people reading it. It's more a matter of if I can put words to it, somehow I can understand it better.
Sure.
I found that if I can put the words together to describe the situation in the right frame for me, which would be more positive frame, then it helps. So I kept thinking about getting on the other side of this.
Okay.
We were going through something, and we're going to get on the other side of this. There was also a case too where people, friends and family, of course, reaching out with their prayers and their thoughts, and at times I had a couple of friends who had their churches, had prayer groups for Lynn. Lynn and I weren't real active in the church and in any of the churches, and so I wondered about this. And of course, I had moments where I questioned, like, wow, should we have been more prayerful? And it scared me because we weren't. And one time I reached out to a friend of mine who I knew had a lot of faith, but he was also a very practical person, practically minded, I thought. And he, because I had a strange moment where I worried that we weren't getting enough prayers. And if only we got more prayers, maybe that would take care of things. That would help Lynn survive this. And I talked to my friend, and he said, when people are praying and sending your prayers, he said, they're just sending you love. He goes, that's love. He goes, that's what they're doing. They're just trying to express their love. And he said, we always have more to give. He said, there's never a shortage of love. You're never going to run out of it. And he said, it's making them feel good to give their love, and hopefully you can feel good receiving their love. And he really put it in perspective in terms of love, and that made a big difference for me in terms of helping me know that in some ways, regardless of how this was all going to turn out, we had a lot of love around us and between us. And that's continued to help me.
Good. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's pretty meaningful. From the time of Lynn's diagnosis to the time of her passing, it was relatively short.
Yeah.
So what was the most difficult thing about that passage of time?
So it was 162 days.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was after Lynn passed away. She passed away on March 26th in 2019. I had to count the days. It seemed like such a short period of time from when she was diagnosed to when she died. And I counted the days, and then I started thinking about it in terms of how many days she was alive.
Uh-huh.
And how many days we were together as a couple since college, for 34 years. And I had this thing of this was just a very small part of this big, wonderful life that we had. It was only 162 days. And I didn't want those 162 days to define our life.
Yeah.
And our life together. And probably, your question of what was the toughest. The toughest was the point where I realized there was a good chance she wasn't going to get better. And I remember being at her bedside. She was an inpatient at the time, and it had to have been one of her visits in January or February, visits to the hospital. And treatments weren't working. We were kind of on this holding pattern. She was taking a lot of medicines, but it was more because she was immunocompromised, and she also was getting blood, and she was getting platelets very frequently. And I realized she was there before me, that this just wasn't working out. It wasn't going in our favor. That's how I would put it. It's just not going in our favor. And I remember I couldn't really breathe. So that moment, when I realized that, I may lose her,
Mm-hmm.
that was the toughest.
Absolutely.
And she was there before me, and she kind of was just like, well, sometimes that's the way it goes. And that's probably the toughest is, and you don't want to go there, but sometimes you need to go there.
Yeah.
You just can't avoid it.
So you've said a lot of really meaningful, powerful things, and I got teary-eyed multiple times as you were talking. That counting the number of days compared to the number of days of her life, compared to the number of days you were together, and having that short amount of time not define your big, wonderful life you had with her. Powerful. And then, kind of coming to the realization that the end of this is going to result in, the other side of this is going to result in Lynn's death. And that she came to it before you did. And I think that's for a lot of people kind of do say that. A lot of caregivers say, they were kind of just waiting for me to catch up with what they already knew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nobody really knows. And when I think about it in terms of caregiving, I want to go to maybe some practical things too,
Sure.
'Cause one of my goals all the time was trying to be at home, get her home.
Mm-hmm.
And because home was a real happy place for her. And there was a good period of time that our daughter was staying with us, and her company allowed her to work from home. Mm-hmm. And
that's great.
A little bit before it was more common.
Mm-hmm.
And so we really, that was always a goal, to not be inpatient, but be an outpatient, be home. even though we'd have trips of 4 or 5 times a week coming back to Moffitt for treatments or for blood and that type of thing. Then when you're home, back to meals and television. I mean, one of the just real comfort things for Lynn. So we set up a couple of blow-up beds in the living room, and she and my daughter would lay on those blow-up beds, and they'd watch. They've had a thing watching Law and Order since Kelsey was probably 4 years old, and thankfully Law and Order's been on for a really long time,
and many of its other shows.
And so it was so cool to watch them laying on these blow-up beds in the living room, watching Law and Order, loving it, blankets, just, enjoying this time. And in the meantime, I'm getting a lot out of that. I was never the same level of Law and Order fan that they were, but I was getting medicines organized. I had we had a round table, like a dining table, and I was trying to figure out a system. So I had a paper with the different medicine routines and what the medicine was and the medicine by it. And so everything was kind of set out, because some things were twice a day, some things were 4 times a day, some were 2 tablets, some were 1, and trying to keep all that straight. And so I had to write it down, had these things, and had a fairly big space with the table. And then I'd set a timer on my phone, and I'd say, okay, Lynn, you got to take your antiviral. And she'd be like, I'm in the middle of watching Law and Order. I don't want to take it. And I didn't argue with her. I was just like, and then she'd, a few minutes later, say, well, why don't you bring it over here so, I can, and here's a bottle of water. So that was, kind of the, there was, I guess I'd say, I wasn't going to argue with her, of course, it's her prerogative. And that's one thing I really learned, too, is, you're, as much as you can feel like all this stuff is being done to you when you're under care for a serious medical condition, you have to remember that you're still in charge. You're still in charge of your own body. And, that's kind of, Lynn was demonstrating that to me and saying, I don't really want to, I'll decide when I want to take it. And, that was like 10 minutes later, but it was so, that, and then we'd have knowing we might have an appointment the next day, it'd be a matter of getting our travel bag together, like a day bag. We had a day bag, and in that day bag, there might be a combination of medicines we might need for the day, some snacks, some food. There might be a change of clothes. So those were the kinds of things, too, that caregiver in the background, kind of trying to make sure things are in order.
Yeah, there's a lot of concrete needs that the caregiver has to figure out and get into some kind of a system. So it sounds like he did that really well.
And I could say that being busy and focusing on the task was a big help. Sitting and doing nothing and letting your mind wander to places that just aren't great places to be was not what I wanted to do. And to avoid that, I was, just like in perpetual motion in many cases.
Okay. So that's one concrete thing I think that would be helpful for caregivers to hear. What are other things that you think caregivers need to hear to help them in this time period?
Well, there's, as tough as it is, making sure you're getting good sleep. The part about having some time to yourself to walk, and get a little exercise, being kind to yourself. I think there's a lot of, am I doing enough? Did I do the right thing? Should I have said that? Those things can happen. And being kind to yourself and realizing that if you made a mistake, it happens, and perhaps you're just being too tough on yourself. Knowing that you can only do the best you can.
Yes.
And even though you may feel like, I wish there was more that I could do. And One of my big task, I guess you could say, was when I'd come visit every day to make sure there was, she had clean underwear and some, comfy clothes to change into. When Lynn was an inpatient, she wanted to wear her own clothes.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted to wear either, kind of comfy pants and shirt, or she might have pajamas. She didn't want to wear a hospital gown or
Mm-hmm.
that type of thing. And I think that was just a huge thing. And there was another, it reminds me of another part that was really a great memory. She found that she loved wearing my white T-shirts, the kind you wear under, when I used to work in an office and I had white T-shirts under my dress shirt. She really liked wearing those. Those were her, and I thought, wow, that just feels great.
That's good.
That she was wearing my white T-shirts. And I think there's little things like that if they happen, enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoy it. Find the little bright lights and bright spots as they pop up. And we would find ourselves sitting in the clinics waiting, and of course everybody in the clinic is going through something extremely tough. And sometimes we'd find ourselves thinking, wow, that's a tough situation. If we saw a parent with a teen or young adult child, and we thought, ooh, how difficult that must be. And having that empathy for someone else kind of took the attention off
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. It took the focus off ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I found that kind of helpful. It's not a case of saying, oh, someone else has it worse, but it was more a matter of being able to not pay attention to yourself for a period of time.
Being mindful of others.
Yeah, being mindful of others. And
Mm-hmm.
it was a helpful thing, not worrying about our situation, but more having some concern and compassion for someone else's
Sure.
situation.
Were there any services at Moffitt that you and Lynn found helpful in addition to the medical care you received?
Well, on an informal basis, the nursing was one of the best parts of the nursing. Is Lynn developed these relationships with the nurses because she'd have long stays, and just the conversations, the
Mm-hmm.
sidebar conversations with the nurses
Sure.
and I know it's not a defined service, but she developed these friendships
Mm-hmm.
with the nurses and got to know a little bit about their life and kids and what they like to do and that type of thing. And that was very helpful. We did go to the library and orientation, or I went. I thought, well, I need to understand a little bit more about this place and
Mm-hmm.
what's where. And, I did not do a lot of research about her disease.
Okay.
And I felt like, well, I'm at a place where, some of the top people in the country are constantly learning about this disease. And there's no way I can come close to developing the knowledge to really to take us somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other end of it is, if you look up information on acute myeloid leukemia, it can paint a pretty dark picture, and I didn't want to go there.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a case where I used the library for research or did research on my own. There was a way of getting my head around it too, which, I thought, well, there's everything statistics. Survival statistics and the likelihood of certain things happening during the course of your care. And what I realized is I don't really need the statistics. What I need is just one person to get better.
Mm-hmm.
I just need one person.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always a case where someone survives this or doesn't experience that,
Right.
And I didn't need a X percentage. I just needed one person to get better. So I just focused on that.
Yeah,
I
that's
just
so
focused
wise.
on that.
Yeah, that's so wise. Can you speak to what it was like for you after Lynn's death?
strangely, perhaps, well, I guess first of all, it was just disorienting. It was hard to imagine. There had been a lot of sadness leading up to that, and in some ways, because she was so sick, there was a little bit of relief. She was no longer in her horrible battle. This pain wasn't going to come back. It was the end of it. So there was oddly a little bit of relief. She was an extremely happy, laughing, smiling person. And, all her friends pretty much would comment on that. And to a certain extent it was true even through most of her cancer care. And so I think we knew that the best we could do for Lynn was to celebrate her life and also try to carry over some of her joy. It sounds strange, right? Like, wow, this horrible, horrible thing happens, and how can you think joy at the time? And I wanted to tell her story to people, and I have a picture of her with one of our, I guess it'd be a great nephew, and she's holding him, and it's just big laugh on her face, and the little baby, he's like maybe 8 months, just big laugh. And I show people that picture. I said, and she died 2 weeks later. And see this person experiencing so much joy, and 2 weeks later she died. I saw as a real positive. Like she was getting every last bit out of her life. And I said to the kids, I tried to, earlier I mentioned this idea of putting words around things. And if I can put words around them, they make better sense to me. And I said to the kids one time, I said, Mom would want us to do something productive and not let this be destructive. Granted, it's a little rhymey, but it also helps me remember it. But I still think about that. That the worst thing would have, no positives come from this. Nothing better come from it. And there's been numerous times over the last 6 years where I think we've done a lot of better, done a lot of good things that have been spurred by this experience. And the other way I've talked to the kids about it is I said, it's almost like we were all in a car accident together, and Mom died, and we all got hurt bad. But we're going to get better. We're going to heal. And we're going to carry on with our lives. And that takes a lot of work. It took me about 6 or so months after Lynn died to realize I needed some help, some counseling help. And that was when I started doing the counseling. It was, transformative. I reached a point where I just didn't feel like I was getting better. I was stuck. And I remember going into the grief counselor through hospice, and said, kind of like, so what do we do now? Like, how does this work?
Right.
What are you going to tell me that somehow is going to fix things? And of course, that's not how it worked. And it was extremely helpful. He was a good listener, and reassured me that I wasn't going crazy, and I felt myself get a little better with every visit.
Yeah, absolutely. You used the word transformative, which of course, I love as a social worker that you use the word transformative. And I think for listeners, that's a really important word coming from your mouth, because it was by virtue of the relationship of talking to somebody about the story, about Lynn, about your disorientation, about the joy and the sorrow, that helped you to feel more grounded with each visit.
And so about a year after Lynn had died is when I started volunteering.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at my volunteering as ongoing therapy.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I do that helps me
Mm-hmm.
keep my experience alive and put some good to work from this experience. And that, while it might sound, I guess I do it for me. You're volunteering, and I think in a lot of cases when you find something to volunteer for that you have a genuine interest in, you're doing it for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
which is perfectly fine.
Absolutely.
You sometimes go, I'm doing it to help others. I'm doing it, to add more good to the world. But hey, you're doing it to live a better life, to feel
Mm-hmm.
better about your life, and get something personally out of it.
Right. That's the definition of what you talked about, being productive rather than destructive.
Yeah, like that first time I drove up to Moffat, I hadn't been here since she was last discharged. She died at home. And I thought, I just cried in the car.
Sure.
And I thought, what am I doing? How can I go back to this place? And it was good. It felt like, wow, I've worked this grief muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's stronger now, and I can do things that I couldn't do. I can lift certain emotions that were too heavy for me, and I can lift them and kind of move them out of the way and carry on.
Yeah.
So
amazing. Are there any other things, Randy, that we haven't talked about that you feel are important to share?
I guess I always keep in mind too that everybody's situation is different,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to respect that. One thing I really learned is when someone's sharing something, a horrible health issue they're dealing with, or you can just listen, and that's enough. And just listen with some compassion and empathy. But I think we naturally as humans might want to relate it to our own experience, or bring up an experience we had that's similar. And I found that's probably not that helpful. When people are sharing their experiences, that's tough.
Let them.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
let them share it, and I guess that's part of caregiving, perhaps too. We're all kind of caregiving for each other at times.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a formal situation. We have friends who lose family members and go through different things, and we're providing a little caregiving when we're on the other end of the phone and letting them tell their story. And I do mention counseling to folks
Good.
more often, because that's the first time I experienced it, and it worked well for me, and probably will in the future.
And I just also want to say that if people are interested in counseling and they really don't know where to start, you always can call the social worker at Moffat Cancer Center and tell them that you're interested in some counseling to manage your own life, whether you're currently caregiving or you've lost a loved one to cancer, and we can, certainly guide them as to the best resources. But it has been an honor to sit here with you today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I just thought of one other thing, which is when you go through, I think whether your loved one survives or doesn't make it, your life's changed.
Mm-hmm.
And being really aware of that is important. We've tried to be very kind of upfront and vocal about what we went through with the loss of Lynn. And I'm always conscious that if I try to park it or pack it down, that's not going to be helpful. So I think really you never get over it is, I guess, the point. You continue to work with it.
Mm-hmm. And you grow around it.
Yeah, you grow around it, you work with it, you find certain things where, wow, it's actually helped me. And back to that, how does something positive come out of this, and trying to not let it be doubly harmful.
Mm-hmm.
So
thank you, Randy.
Thanks, Donna.
Thank you for listening to In It Together, a podcast about caregiving. In It Together is brought to you by Moffitt Cancer Center's Patient Library and Welcome Center in collaboration with our social work department. Special thanks to Lloyd Goldstein, musician in residence here at Moffitt Cancer Center's Arts and Medicine program, for our music. And thanks goes to our producers, Jackie Beauchamp, Patient Library Supervisor, and Randy Isaacson, Family Advisor. For more information about the services mentioned in this episode, please view the show notes or visit the In It Together page on moffitt.org. Thank you for spending time listening, and we hope that it was useful. Have a great day.